Today on the Women's Healthbeat, Dr. Felice sits down with Lyme Literate doctor, Dr. Darin Ingels. That's today on the Women's Healthbeat, right here on the Zubia Live channel.
We'd like to say thank you to our sponsor, Harbor Compounding. Harbor Compounding is a full-service pharmacy that specializes in personalized medicine, specifically in compounded hormone replacement therapies, pediatric medicines, pain therapies, custom thyroid strengths, and dermatological preparations. And for those who have four-legged friends, veterinary formulations. If you'd like to learn more about Harbor Compounding Pharmacy, visit harborcompounding.com.
Hello, I'm Shane Schultz, the executive producer of the Zubia Live channel. Zubia Live is your interactive live streaming video community that specializes in health and wellness topics that affect you. You can always find us on our social media at Zubia Live or our website, zubialive.com. Today, we have another wonderful episode of the Women's Healthbeat hosted by Dr. Felice Gersh. Dr. Felice is board certified in both as an OBGYN physician as well as integrative medicine and has helped women worldwide with her efforts and knowledge. All right, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Felice Gersh.
Hi, I'm Dr. Felice Gersh. Welcome to my show, The Women's Healthbeat. Tonight, I am so thrilled to introduce one of my good friends and a world's expert in Lyme disease, Dr. Darin Ingels. Hi, Darin. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, good, Felice. How are you?
Great. Well, I'm so happy that you could join us because we are going to talk about a very huge problem for so many people. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding among the medical community. And I hope that you'll enlighten us about Lyme disease. To begin with, I thought you could just tell us, what does the word Lyme mean and where does it come from? And what exactly is Lyme disease?
Sure. Well, Lyme disease itself is actually an infection. And the reason it's called Lyme disease, it's actually named after a town in my home state here of Connecticut called Lyme, Connecticut. And back in the late 70s, there was a cluster of children that had what's called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is kind of a rare condition in children. But there was a lot of kids in this community that had this condition. And it took them several years to figure out why so many kids had it. But they finally discovered that it was actually caused by a bacteria. So, with infections, you can have bacterial infections, viral infections, fungal infections, and so forth. So this is actually a bacterial infection that's transmitted through the bite of a tick. And out here in New England, we have a lot of ticks because we have a lot of animals like deer and rodent and so forth that carry these ticks. And so you get bit by a tick. When you get bit by the tick, it transmits this bacteria through its saliva, gets in your bloodstream, and that's what ultimately causes this infection.
It's really all over the country now, right? Not just in New England or the East Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. New England's always kind of been a hot spot, but the central Midwest is another area where we see a lot of Lyme. So that's Wisconsin, Minnesota, Northern Illinois. But actually, your state of California is now sort of emerging as a leading area of Lyme disease. And if you keep following a map that the CDC publishes every year on the incidence of Lyme disease, we keep seeing those numbers in California continue to grow. So even though we have these hot spots around the country, really, you can find it in any state. And actually, we find it in several other countries around the world. So it's not even unique to North America.
So if someone is in Lyme country, which now turns out to be the entire U.S., and they're concerned, like, I want to find out, could I have Lyme or one of my family members? What would be some of the symptoms that you might look for?
Sure. Well, the way I always kind of think about Lyme disease is what I call acute Lyme disease versus chronic Lyme disease. And symptomatically, they look a little bit different. So when someone has acute Lyme disease, some of the classic symptoms is you can get headache, you can get a very high fever, 104, 105 degrees. You can get joint pain. You can get numbness and tingling in your hands and your feet. You can get this really horrible fatigue, and sometimes even get a condition called Bell's palsy, where one side of your face starts to droop a little bit. But the telltale sign of Lyme disease is a specific kind of skin rash, and it's called an erythema migrans. And when you look at it, it kind of looks like a target or a bullseye. And there's really no other condition out there that causes that rash. So if you ever see that on your skin, you know that you have, Lyme disease.
Oh, so if someone actually has some of those symptoms, even if they're not the classic cases, what should they do and what kind of treatment might they undergo?
Well, the first step is really getting good testing. And, we want to try and be able to identify if it really is Lyme disease. Unfortunately, with Lyme, it actually mimics a lot of other conditions. In fact, its nickname is the great mimic or the great imitator. There's about 100 different symptoms associated with Lyme disease, and it looks like a lot of other things. So,
oh my gosh, 100 symptoms.
Over 100,
that's phenomenal.
So I think what ends up happening for a lot of people is they go to their doctor, they have this myriad of symptoms that sounds like it could be mono, it could be a viral infection, and in some cases doctors just don't know to do the right test. So you definitely want to ask your doctor about doing Lyme testing. We could probably have a much longer discussion about the nature of Lyme testing. Unfortunately, it's not terribly accurate. So if you really are suspicious you might have Lyme, I recommend that you probably get in the hands of what we call a Lyme Literate doctor who knows a little bit more about Lyme disease. And there are specific labs around the country that specialize in Lyme testing that are more likely to give you a better diagnosis.
So if someone goes to a good doctor who knows all about Lyme and they do get diagnosed with Lyme early on, can they get cured? And what would the treatment be?
Sure. So for someone with acute Lyme disease, the conventional treatment is antibiotics. The CDC recommends antibiotics for 21 days. Typically for an adult, it's doxycycline. For people who are allergic to that, they might take amoxicillin. After 21 days, hopefully people are feeling better. I think some of the Lyme doctors out there feel that 21 days isn't long enough to treat Lyme disease, and so they'll usually recommend up to 6 weeks. Lyme as a bacteria is a very slow-growing bacteria. If you look at the bacteria that causes sinus infection, they replicate about every 20 minutes. Well, Lyme disease replicates about every 1 to 16 days.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of the antibiotics we take actually don't kill the infection. All they do is they stop it from replicating. So doxycycline is a great example. And if it only works when the organism doesn't replicate that often, it just takes a lot longer to treat. So I think most of us who treat a lot of Lyme disease feel that 6 weeks is more appropriate for treating acute Lyme disease.
Good to know.
So that's the recommendation from the CDC. And then beyond that, depending on how people feel at the end of that time period, we sort of make a decision about whether we need to continue their treatment.
Now, you mentioned chronic Lyme as distinct from acute Lyme. So if someone gets treated for acute Lyme, as you just described, would they still be at risk to develop chronic Lyme? Or how great is the cure rate? Or are only people who don't get treated the ones who end up with chronic Lyme?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And the honest answer is we really don't know. According to the CDC, they say that only about 10% of people with Lyme disease go on to develop chronic Lyme disease, which is a relatively small number. I think those of us in the Lyme world feel that that number is much, much greater. And that probably has more to do that there's a lot of people that have Lyme disease that don't know they have it, and therefore they never do get early treatment. So I think, the success in people who have acute Lyme disease, who get early treatment, I think the cure rate is pretty high. I see a lot of patients who go through treatment, they become symptom-free, and we don't necessarily see problems afterwards. But for those who fail antibiotic therapy or other types of treatment, or again, they didn't know that they had Lyme and developed chronic Lyme, it's a much more challenging situation, and the treatment strategy has to change a little bit.
Can you tell us a little bit about what symptoms are involved with chronic Lyme as distinct from acute Lyme, and what happens if you never get treated? What can be the ultimate outcome?
Yeah, well, you can still get a lot of the same symptoms you would see in acute Lyme disease. I think some of the other things we see in chronic Lyme are really more neurological. People will complain of what we call brain fog. Their memory's terrible. They forget people's names. They have a hard time retrieving words. People will describe balance problems. They feel clumsy. They trip a lot. Again, the neuropathy, that numbness, tingling can get a lot worse. So we tend to see a lot more neurological kind of symptoms. Completely untreated, there have been deaths associated with Lyme disease. So, it's fortunately a very rare complication, but it is possible. So I think most of the people I work with chronic Lyme are what we kind of call the walking wounded. They function barely. Some people are debilitated. Some people are in wheelchairs. It really is a disease of gradation, and we see it across the spectrum. But I think the longer it's in your body and it goes untreated, the greater possibility it has of damaging particularly your nervous system.
So can someone with Lyme disease develop dementia?
Absolutely. In fact, very well-known actor Christopherson, who was diagnosed with dementia, was actually found to actually have Lyme disease. And after undergoing Lyme treatment, his dementia, as far as I understand, resolved, or at least got a lot better. So I think a lot of
Wow.
neurological conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, when someone comes into my clinic anyway, and I see that, that's at least at the top of my list, is to make sure that's not part of the contributing factor.
Well, that's a huge bit of information right there, because as we know, dementia is a very common problem. And to think that people can have something treatable and it goes untreated and they're just labeled as, say, untreatable Alzheimer's, go on to develop, say, completely disabling dementia sounds terrible. So why do you think it is that the conventional medical world hasn't really embraced Lyme disease and really educated the doctors to really be thinking of it and to understand how to treat it?
That's a great question. And, since we discovered Lyme back in the early 80s, we've got 40 plus years of research. We've come to understand a lot about this organism. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure why public health departments and the government haven't embraced the prevalence of Lyme and really put more money, more time, more research into trying to figure out why so many people are getting infected and finding better ways of treating it. On the upside, though, the government has now created, just recently, this past month, a Lyme, or I should say a tick-borne working group. And this group is now going to start investigating, different diagnoses, different treatments. So there's at least one step forward in trying to get better information out there at the government level, at the public health level, to make people more aware and hopefully find, better ways of, preventing and treating this, horrible illness.
Oh, well, that's really encouraging to hear, because it seems like Lyme is truly an epidemic. I was wondering, is it growing in frequency, or are we just becoming more aware of it? Are there more ticks out there, or are immune systems not competent in dealing with it? What do you think is going on with this Lyme epidemic?
Well, I think it's all of the above. I mean, everything you just listed, definitely it's the fastest growing infectious disease in the world. We have about 300,000 reported cases in the United States and about 65,000 reported cases in Europe every year. Yeah. And that's what's reported. And we know that it's grossly underreported. So our best estimate is that, at least in the United States, it's probably more than 500,000 people per year with newly diagnosed Lyme. Part of the reason that we're seeing that is that there are more ticks. The World Health Organization actually published a report suggesting that climate change accounts for the increase not only in Lyme disease, but really anything that's transmitted through an insect that bites you, so mosquitoes and ticks and fleas and so forth. So as it's warmer and things don't naturally kill off these insects, there's just more of them. They reproduce at a greater rate, and they have a higher disposition of infecting people.
Also, that there's a lot of change within the environment in terms of the animal population as well. Perhaps, the animals that ticks like to live on, like deer, there's not a lot of natural predators for the deer any longer. The coyotes, the mountain lions, they've been more extinguished, and they're exterminated by the way that we've encroached on their environment, and maybe we have too many deer, and they're just growing those ticks like crazy.
Yeah, and we know that the deer aren't even the biggest vector of transmission. I mean, it can be on mice and rats and squirrels and raccoons. Any furry little creature that can wander in and out of your yard potentially could be carrying ticks. The one animal that I think's being impacted the most with the environment is humans. Everything that we get exposed to is affecting our terrain. Again, we could look at our gut health, our diet, all of the chemicals we get exposed to. And when you start looking at the cumulative effect of all these toxins and toxicants, it really undermines our immune system. We know that Lyme disease isn't really a new bug. I mean, we discovered it about 40 years ago, but they pulled an Iceman out of Austria that they found is 5,000 years old. And when they did DNA analysis on his blood, he had signs of the Lyme organism in his blood. So this critter's been around for quite a long time. It's just something has changed in the last 3 or 4 decades that has made us so much more susceptible to the effects of this organism. So I think, part of where we have to really look at controlling this is looking at improving our overall health, our gut integrity, our immune system, and it's something really that most doctors don't talk about with their patients.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. One of the things that I've been thinking about regarding Lyme is all of the endocrine disruptors, the xenoestrogens,
Right.
Because we now know, because estrogen is one of my favorite hormones, that estrogen is very key to this process that's part of the immune system gobbling up bacteria and such, which is phagocytosis. And that without proper estrogen, you really can't have that function, which is necessary to eradicate infections. And when you're living in a world full of endocrine disruptors like bisphenol A and phthalates and heavy metals and such, then our immune cells really can't function properly. And maybe that's really one of the many contributors to why we have such a growth in the Lyme epidemic. And we've got to clean up our environment as well as our immune systems and so forth. And it's a big undertaking, but I'm so glad that doctors like you are out there on the front lines educating. I hear you have a book coming out soon on Lyme.
Yes, I wrote a book called The Lyme Solution, and it's due to be released March 27th of this year. So I'm very excited. I've had Lyme disease myself, so I wrote this as a patient as much as a doctor in my own experience and having treated thousands of Lyme patients. But it's really a user guide. It's something that patients can take. There's only one chapter in that book where you need a doctor. Everything else is something that people can do on their own. And we're here certainly as environmental medicine doctors to give people guidance on how they can live cleaner, healthier lives and hopefully get over this Lyme hump.
Oh, well, I can't wait to read that book. I hope you'll get me a copy, and I will definitely be recommending it because this is going to be life-changing for so many people to have access to that kind of information. And I want to invite you to come back. We're going to talk so much more. Some of the topics I want to cover with you on Lyme are specific to women. For example, what about women who are pregnant or breastfeeding? And so there's so many more things to discuss about Lyme and how to protect yourself and, what can we do? So there's just going to be many more conversations. So I hope you'll join me and come back again. And I want to, once again, thank you so much for joining me here tonight and sharing your incredible wisdom on Lyme disease.
Great. Thanks, Felice. It was a pleasure being here.
Wow. This show never ceases to amaze me with the information it provides. We'd like to say thank you to Dr. Darin Ingels for being with us today. And we also like to invite the Lyme community to share their story with the Zubia Live community on our website at zubialive.com. And remember, if you have a health and wellness story or topic that affects you and you'd like to share it with the Zubia Live community, make sure to download our app at zubialive.com or your favorite app location. But for now, we'd like to say thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for joining us today. While we're grateful for our host and guest on Zubia Live, we must mention that the views and opinions expressed are not necessarily shared by Zubia Live, its hosts, guests, affiliates, sponsors, management, or employees. Furthermore, Zubia Live videos are not meant to replace any medical care and should not be used in lieu of seeking professional medical advice. We hope you enjoyed our broadcast, and we'll see you again soon.